Remember the pandemic? You remember the pandemic? Yes, yes, I do.
Oh, very well.
And all of the crazy, eviction moratoriums, everything happening that made it nearly impossible for landlords to get anyone out of their units, regardless of the reason. And that was always my issue with, the eviction moratorium. I can understand, I could have understood it a little bit, right? If it was like, hey, if you lost your job because of the pandemic, then we're going to give you a little bit of leeway where you can't just be thrown out on the streets. This is obviously an insane situation. But that wasn't what it was. It was like all consuming, this blanket thing. It didn't matter if you'd lost your job. You didn't even have to show proof that you had any financial impact or strain whatsoever from the pandemic. And you had people who took advantage of it. And they live in places for a year, not paying rent. And then at the end of the year, they have this back rent that they're not able to pay, and you still can't get them out of there. And they didn't even have to prove, by the way, that it was like a financial reason for a landlord not to be able to evict someone. You could have someone in there who's literally running a crack house or a whorehouse, and you couldn't evict them because of the pandemic. It was just crazy stuff. So a small win for landlords. This from mynorthwest.com. Washington Supreme Court hands landlords major victory. They call it a major victory. I call it a small win considering the sea of bad things they're under after CARES Act challenge. And so essentially there was a lawsuit over this that said the way this was applied was way too broad. And you didn't require any sort of proof that it's financial or whatever it is. And so the Washington State Supreme Court has sided with landlords and said, yeah, that was applied too broadly. If you had someone running a crack house, for instance, and you couldn't evict them because of the CARES Act and the pandemic, well, that doesn't make any sense. And so a little glimpse of sanity from the Washington State Supreme Court and a little bit of hope for landlords that maybe reason is making a comeback. I don't know. So Andrew Barkis, who's a state representative, he also happens to be a landlord, joins us not only to react to that state Supreme Court ruling, but also to talk about some shady business that's happening in Olympia. Representative Barkis, welcome back to Undivided.
It's great to be here once again with you, Brandi. Always good to have a discussion about all the things happening here in Olympia and beyond. So good to see you.
We'll get to some depressing things on housing, which is per the usual, but also the state Supreme Court making a ruling that helps landlords. Color me shocked.
This is a big case. And yes, and I think I can't emphasize enough that in today's environment, especially in the legislature with all the bad stuff and the fact that we're not fixing these, that the Supreme Court recognized that there was an error within the context of the CARES Act with regards to notice and the ability to evict somebody. We had the eviction moratorium for a long period of time, and I was always concerned that I said that moratorium is going to turn into policy or legislation, which in fact it did over the course of time. And in my opinion, and obviously many, that why the lawsuit was brought, is that it was being utilized to allow tenants to stay in and not work within the confines of the eviction system that we have, as complicated as it is in Washington State.
Yeah, and as we were describing, it makes sense. I mean, this really should have been an easy decision, and hopefully it was an easy decision for them to reach, because clearly the issue they were trying to get at was the economic hardships brought about by COVID. Yeah. So to say that, okay, yeah, but across the board, even if you have someone, for instance, violating the conditions of their lease by being engaged in criminal activity, like they're using the place for a meth house or a crack house, like that's not the kind of thing that the CARES Act was meant to protect. So I'm glad they could get this one right, at least. So I want to talk about some shady stuff that's going on. I guess we'll characterize it as shady. To me, there's already been a lot of this happening. We discussed on the show, for instance, a certain state representative who, they do a rent control hearing scheduled the very first day of the session. She gets to vote for the rent control bill. Next day is, sworn in as a state senator, gets to do the hearing on the state Senate side. And it's like, all that seems timed interestingly. I get a call from your staff last week. There was a very hastily convened housing committee meeting that Republicans opted not to attend. Describe to me what happened.
Well, last week was policy cutoff in the House of Representatives. Our last committee, housing committee hearing schedule was Thursday, the 8 to 10 slot. There were 4 bills that were slated for executive session or moving out of committee. And we have a 2-hour slot. And then, we have to conduct that business by the end of that 2 hours. If it gets done, you get them all out or not. But that's the deadline for the policy cutoff. So there was 4 bills, one of which, House Bill 1079, had to do with limiting the ability for people to own more than 200 manufactured homes or 5 mobile home parks. Now, the premise around this is trying to prevent big corporations coming in and buying these mobile home parks. And so they're phrasing it as supply and affordability. But really, it's about limiting property rights, the ability for people to own property. We just couldn't stand that. We had 10 amendments, so it was going to take a while for that bill to get through. We started the committee, we broke for caucus, we came back, and he changed the order, and he brought that bill first, and we went to work, putting forth our amendments. Now, during that, he kept saying, hey, we don't have time. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. And he started cutting off debate. Rep. Defoe, myself, Rep. Connors, many times they just said, hey, we don't have time for this. And we were bringing forth some very substantive amendments. Long story short, we got through that bill, one other bill, but 2 did not get through to the caucus. They were extremely upset, to be nice about it. Like we kicked the hornet's nest a little bit, but you know what? We did our job. And when it was all said and done, only 2 bills moved out. He banged the gavel, said, that's done. We're done with the hearing. And that concludes our business of the Housing Committee. And we're sorry, but 2 bills didn't get through. Well, lo and behold, around 2:30 in the afternoon, we get this notification that we're going to have another Housing Committee at 6 p.m. to move one more bill. Unprecedented, Brandi. We've never done that, not my 9 years. I've asked long-term members here. They said, nope, never seen that during cutoff week. So people should be concerned that, we've already seen this setup of the rules that we're about to see next week when we go on the floor. To see this in committee is a whole nother level, Brandi. I haven't seen this before. And, it's almost as if you don't really need us. You're kind of an inconvenience. We want to push our policy through. You're kind of an inconvenience. Don't really want to hear from you, but the people want to hear from us. We have the right to do that. We're representing a lot of people. And so that's why people should care. The other thing is having this second meeting that evening, again, unprecedented. So now we're going to set this precedent. So do we really have a cutoff time? Do we really have to worry about it? So many, many levels. I mean, if you're watching what's happening in the legislature, and you've been doing a great job of getting that message out, because we're getting the feedback by people signing in on bills, by letting their voices be heard, you've got to pay attention what's happening here. And especially next week, when we hit the floor, usually a lot of people don't pay attention when we're on the floor for all these long hours and nights. You pay attention how they're going to process these bills coming through. And I guarantee you, we're not done with the fight. We're going to fight tooth and nail on the bad policies. They're going to do everything they can to stop us from doing that.
Well, and it also just shows, I think, if Democrats want to do something, they can do it and they will do it. If they need to change the rules to do it, they'll do it. If they need to do something unprecedented and call a meeting at 6 p.m., they'll do it. And one of the things that people should watch for, to your point, on the House floor with this big rule change that they can have a simple majority to end debate, they've said, oh, don't worry, we'll only use it in extreme cases. I don't think that's true. I think we're going to see it used very quickly and very frequently. I hope that's not the case, but I doubt it. If there's still a bill, we had a policy cutoff, for instance, there's still, fiscal issues going on. If there is one bill, Representative Barkas, on the housing front that you're most concerned about as the session progresses, what is it?
Well, of course, rent control. I mean, it's still moving through the House and the Senate. We'll see it. I'm kind of surprised they didn't sneak it in before we went to floor action. It's now setting up that, if they're wise, they will do it early in floor action, not towards the end. But again, I don't think, here again is that arrogance, right? We'll do it whenever we want because they can put as many amendments. We'll just call them dilatory and we'll just cut their debate off. So we can't use the clock in the same way that we would do to stop bad policy. And this session, man, there's a plethora of bad policy. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm concerned about a lot of the other bills that we've seen, not only housing, but public safety, the Parents' Bill of Rights, all the tax bills that are coming. We haven't even, seen those yet. But, I'm more concerned also about the fact that a lot of good bills that were presented that we really should be considering about supply, eviction reform bills, those were never heard. Those were never even considered. So it really draws a magnifying glass onto the agenda that the Democrats, the majority, are putting forth still in the state of Washington, and they're just not getting it. And that speaks to your point about that website they put out yesterday. They just don't get it, Brandi.
Yeah, they don't. Well, it's fear mongering, and I overuse the phrase gaslighting sometimes, but it truly is. On the budget thing, like we discussed, it's like, okay, let's say that all these worst of the worst things are going to come to fruition because you have to cut all this stuff. Whose fault is that? Anybody?
their fault.
Who
Yeah.
literally whose fault is that? There's
You
only
know,
one party in control. It's mind-boggling.
40 years, Brandi. Let's not forget that, right? I mean, they've been essentially in control. The last governor, 16 years. So we've been living underneath this for a long time here in Washington State. And to drag out the old tried and true, grandma's going to lose her care and we're going to close this down, and we're going to cut education, and the kids are going to starve. I mean, that is the oldest stuff in the book, and it's disingenuous at best. Especially, we're just kind of shocked. We kind of laughed. And when I saw that, I forwarded that on to our comms department because I said, look, here they are admitting that they are really, they've done this. I mean, it's golden for us because we just point and go, yeah, we know this. And now you're going to have to make those decisions on making cuts. But more importantly, you always lay out the argument to make all these horrific cuts to justify the revenue, and that's the tax increases. Let's go after the wealthy. Let's go after business. Let's go after everybody and tax the crud out of it to try to do this. There's no amount of money that they're not willing to bring forth. And it was most interesting when the governor released his budget on his way out the door, right? He leaves this $14 billion pile there.
Mm-hmm.
And then he increased spending even more moving forward. It is ludicrous. I mean, we've blown through 23 billion in surplus over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Should not be in this position, should not be facing cuts, and we should definitely not be facing tax increases.
Yeah, zero accountability, zero self-awareness. It's wild. Representative Andrew Barkis, we appreciate it.
Brandi, I appreciate you, and stay tuned. More fun stuff coming from Under the Dome here in Olympia.
No thanks. No thanks. You know what? In fact, we're not covering it anymore. We're done. All right, see you later.
Only happy stories from now on.
Okay, good. Although I did hear you guys save George Washington. George Washington still gonna be on the flag, so thank you for
still
that.
Gonna be on the flag.
Okay.
We'll take little victories, right?
Small victories to keep us sane. All right, thanks again.
You bet.
Yeah, that's a good piece of news we didn't share on the show. That bill that would have taken George Washington off the flag because woke something, it died for the session. So that's good. It's the little things that matter the most. But I would have been pissed, honestly, because that they would have replaced it with some woke, weird sort of thing to send some sort of message. So George is safe for now. For now, but I look forward to them bringing that back up next session, as they will. And they'll bring it up every session until it passes. All right, our weekly housing segment is brought to you by the Rental Housing Association of Washington. Become a member of RHA today, rhawa.org. They are down there fighting the good fight in Olympia, trying to prevent rent control from going through, God forbid. So if you're a small to mid-sized landlord, not only will they help fight for you if you're dealing with some of the nonsense that's been happening in our state around housing policy, but also they're fighting for you in Olympia. So rhawa.org, rhawa.org.